Hello everybody and welcome to today's video on how to revise GCSE English language. So my first tip is that you need to know each exam question inside out. I'll go through the topics you need to know and then I'll give you an example in a second. To begin with, what is the question about? Just in your own words, could you tell me what that question asks you to do? Is it to analyse language or structure? Is it to write a summary? Is it a writing question? Are there marks awarded for spelling, punctuation and grammar? What is the question asking you to do? What are the assessment objectives? There might be one, there might be two. I'm focusing specifically in this video on AQA English language, but I suppose you could apply this to all exam boards. Knowing the assessment objective is something that takes a bit of time and effort, but it's absolutely essential if you want to maximize your results. And that doesn't mean that you memorize the assessment objective word for word. What it means is you understand what each question is assessing. How many marks are available for the question, and as a result, how much time should you spend? There's a video in my English language playlist about organizing your time. To me, it's one of the most important things. Now that comes down to how many marks are available. You should spend around 1 minute per mark available. So AQA English language paper 1 question 2 is an 8-mark question and you should spend around 10 minutes on it. But here's the problem. You could easily spend 20 or 30 minutes on that question. The only way you're going to know how long you should spend on the question is through looking at the marks available, working out roughly how long you should spend on it, and looking at the clock and managing your timing. Because of course, if you spend too long on the relatively low mark AQA English language paper 1 question 2, you're going to run out of time when you get to the higher marks in question 4, question 5, etc. What about the variation in the question? So you need to know, for example, that paper 2 question 2, yes, it's a summary writing question, but it could ask you to summarize the differences, it could ask you to summarize the similarities, it could ask you to summarize details about a certain topic which is presented in both sources. You need to know the possible variations in the questions so that you don't panic, because you don't want to go in thinking paper 2 question 2 is always going to be summarized differences, and then you see it summarized similarities and think, I don't know what I'm doing. So knowing about the variations we've had so far, or the possible variations in the questions, is really important. And it's worth me saying at this point, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be starting a brand new series of animated videos on AQA English language paper 1 and paper 2. They are 5 minutes each, really condensed videos, and they're going to help you answer all of these questions. Now, of course, I'm going to recommend you pick up my Guide to English Language, linked in the description, £6.99 paperback. I know I get a bit of stick sometimes that I always mention my books, but obviously I wrote them to help you for these exams, so it would be silly not to suggest that you buy them. Tips for doing well. So just what you know you need to do through looking at the mark schemes, perhaps student exemplars, all of that kind of thing. What is it you need to do well in these questions? And I'll go through an example of all of these for one question in a second. And then things to avoid. So, for example, you must avoid analysing language in paper 2 question 2. Now, let me give you an example. We'll look at paper 2, question 2, the summary writing question, because it is a question where the actual wording of the question doesn't really tell you everything you need to know. Your preparation beforehand, knowing all of these kinds of things on the screen, is what's so important. Okay, so for AQA English language paper 2 question 2, what is the question about? Well, it's writing a summary based on both source A and source B. What are the assessment objectives? AO1, identify and interpret explicit and implicit information and ideas, select and synthesize evidence from different texts. Now this is an assessment objective we actually see in 3 different questions. Paper 1 question 1, paper 2 question 1, and here in paper 2 question 2. It's assessed slightly differently in each question. Paper 1 question 1, you can get away with just explicit, obvious ideas. Paper 2 question 1, you begin to interpret, infer through those implicit ideas which are represented in the text. And here in paper 2 question 2, I guess the big difference is that we are now synthesizing. So knowing what is meant by synthesizing is really important, because you cannot get away with writing about just one source. For the synthesis element of this question, you have to show understanding of information from both sources, and you'll actually be capped at half marks at best if you only write about one source, because you're essentially not synthesizing information if you do that. So you've got to write about both sources. So knowing your assessment objectives is going to help you to succeed with these questions. How many marks are awarded? This is a good one. There are 8 marks, which of course means you spend around 10 minutes. And that helps with the fact that this question will have a very narrow focus. What you're being asked to compare, there won't be tons of information that you can choose from the sources, but that's absolutely fine because it is a short question. It's only worth 10% of the entire marks awarded in the paper. You should spend 10 minutes on it, then move on. And that, I think, really does help us. It also helps us to realise the key skill of this question, which is not finding whether it's similarities or differences or views on the topic, but actually what we do when we found them. And I'll come onto that in a second as well. As I talked about previously, the variation in this question is that it could be summarised differences, it could be summarised similarities, it could be summarised details on a certain topic, like summarise what you understand about the different boats used by the fishermen in both sources. And that brings us on to tips for doing well. The key tip for doing well is the skill of inference. So you find, let's just give an example that we're writing about differences. You find your difference, but that's not the key thing. The key thing is, given that this is the difference, what does this lead me to realise about the topic I've been asked to focus on? So I often give the example of the J. Rayner paper. J. Rayner and his son, and he's helping him with his maths homework or trying to, and then the boy Henry writing to his dad trying to come home from boarding school, if you've seen that paper. Well, the key thing about inference here is this. You could say one is rude and jokes with his dad, and the other one is polite to his dad. That's a difference. But the inference is, well, given that this is the difference, what does this lead me to realise about the topic, i.e. the boys, because the question was about what we learn about the two sons. And the inference would be, well, actually, one has a warm, close relationship with his father, where he feels that he can have that joking banter with his dad, whereas the other one has a more distant, formal relationship with his father. So the inference bit of this question is writing something that is perceptive. It's not clearly stated in the text. You've had to work it out for yourself and you're inferring. So I would go into paper 2 question 2 with that word inference in my head, knowing that when I found the difference or the similarity or whatever it is I've been asked to choose, that I'm going to try and draw an inference from it. Things to avoid: language analysis. I see it so often in paper 2 question 2. It's not assessing AO2 analysis of language and structure, so you mustn't write about it. So that's the first stage, just knowing each question inside out. And of course, my videos on this channel and my revision guide will help with that. And I've written this list. I'll put it in the description of the video because I didn't want to give you things to suggest you memorize that would not be helpful. So I didn't just want to add to the things you feel like, oh, now I've got to learn that. But I do think these are the things you need to know about the 10 questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in paper 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in paper 2. When you're really familiar with them, when you could test yourself and say, okay, AQA English Language paper 2 question 3, what are the assessment objectives? When you could answer these topics, these questions, then I think you're ready for practice papers. Now, I'm really excited to say that this week we have released a brand new book at mrbruff.com and on Amazon, which is a set of AQA Paper 1 practice papers. So follow the link in the description to pick up a copy. It contains 6 practice papers for AQA English Language Paper 1, and then at the back there's indicative content. Indicative content is kind of like the answers. It's what you get in the mark scheme. It's not sample answers written out in paragraphs, but it's here's some of the things you might have written about. So what you do is you complete a paper and then you look at the indicative content and see, did you find the sorts of things that we found ourselves? It's made up of a mix of 20th and 21st century sources taken from a selection of novels, some you might recognise, some you might not, and I put it together with Mrs. Hallahan, who you might remember from the podcast episode Ask the Examiner. So I'm really excited about this book because there is just a real need for practice papers. Do follow the link in the description and pick up a copy. But you can then attempt practice papers. And when you attempt a practice paper, you should attempt it in exam conditions. So I do think it's useful to sit down in a quiet space, give yourself the proper time, the 1 hour 45 minutes, and attempt the entire paper. See how you do. Now, the reason I say attempt the entire paper is this. So many students can take one isolated question and do really well on it. But of course, what this is testing is not your ability to answer the questions, but your ability to answer the questions under very strict timed conditions. So you have to get a really strong feel for how can you do in the 1 hour 45 minutes of this exam. Most English lessons don't give you many mock practice times, and the reason for that is, that perhaps you only have a 1 hour English lesson, so you can't have a full 1 hour 45, or teachers are using the time to teach you the skills. You need to see if you can put them together in 1 hour 45. And when you've completed a practice paper, then you go to the final stage, which is to reflect, to look back on it, to reflect on and ask yourself, how did I manage my timing? Did I write way too much for paper 1 question 2 and then run out of time on the much higher marks awarded for paper 1 question 4? Did I forget that 16 marks were awarded for spelling, punctuation and grammar in question 5? So reflecting is so important, looking back on how you did and thinking about it. Now I'll give you an example. This is what normally happens. Students normally find that they write a lot for paper 1 question 2, quite a bit for paper 1 question 3, and not very much for paper 1 question 4. In fact, I have seen dozens of papers where students write the same amount for 2, 3 and 4. Well, question 4 is worth 20 marks. It's worth all of marks awarded for paper 1 question 1, 2 and 3 put together. So clearly you need to write more for that question than you do for 2 and 3. So let's say you complete a practice paper, and when you look back you realise, do you know what, I did a page for question 2, a page for question 3 and a page for question 4. Clearly I'm struggling on question 4. I need to go back and look at it. I need to watch the videos, read the revision guides, look at sample papers, download mark schemes, all of that kind of thing, and really see where am I struggling with question 4. And then the second time round on my practice paper, I might just attempt 2 or 3 question 4s and see if I can really get good at spending 20-25 minutes on that question. And that's the way to complete practice papers in a manner which will help you, is to complete a paper, look back at it, reflect on it, think about the timing, think about how much you wrote, think about if you drifted off the assessment objectives. And all of this is advice for you revising at home on your own. I hope you found this video useful. Please do subscribe to the channel. As I said, those animated videos are coming really soon. They're going to help. I know they are. Thanks again for watching.